starting. So this session is looking at what might Welsh agriculture look like in the zero carbon society of 2050. And so we've got a number of speakers from industry and academia to discuss that, and then we'll have a discussion at the end. So just before we start, and we'll be starting with Jonathan Scurlock from the NFU first, it's basically, thank you all for joining us for this discussion. Sort of request is basically not to take screenshots while we're doing that, thanks. So if you can respect people's privacy. The session is going to be recorded, so if you don't wish to appear on screen, please turn your own videos off. And if you have got questions, highlight those with a Q in the chat so we can pick those up and look at those and actually bring those into the discussion later on. Also, as hopefully you've been doing earlier on, tweet during a session if there's things that you want to put out there. Okay, so the first speaker of this session is Jonathan Scurlock, who's Chief Policy Advisor for Renewable Energy and Climate Change at the NFU. And Jonathan has a broad background, both in terms of originally in, I guess, there's sort of a lot of the science, but has been involved very much in the NFU for well over a decade now. So Jonathan, if you're able to share your screen. Thank you.
I'm Jonathan Scurlock. I'm the Chief Advisor, Renewable Energy and Climate Change at the National Farmers Union of England and Wales. You may be aware that a major piece of work that we've been embarking upon since last year is a grand ambition to take the whole agricultural sector with us. So a certain amount of leadership on our part as the largest agricultural trade association. But we do want to bring everybody else in the agricultural sector along with us on this journey. And it is about getting to net zero in line with national political goals. And you will be aware that just yesterday, the Prime Minister put out his own 10-point plan, which is going to take us at least part of the way there. So this goal is about an ambition to get there 10 years ahead of the national goal. We believed, starting really in 2018 with some considerations that clearly our ambitions around tackling climate change were going to have to be taken up a step or two. We believe that a 20-year goal rather than a 30-year goal, looking ahead a complete generation, was perhaps more realistic. There are some things that are going to be achievable just in the next decade, out to 2030, and then other things perhaps with new technologies and new knowledge, which may indeed be deliverable in the decade beyond that. But this is very much within sort of the future that current agricultural practitioners can see ahead of them. Pictures there show just a couple of aspects of this plan. Anaerobic digesters, a very useful tool for increasing resource efficiency and driving productivity, but potentially also a tool by which we may be able to actually show demonstrable removals of greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere that help to counterbalance our unavoidable food production emissions. And then on the right-hand panel, many opportunities that we have for managing our natural resources and the environment around our farms to enhance the carbon stored in soils and vegetation through, for example, things like enhanced hedgerow management. There we go. Right. So this document, Achieving Net Zero, the Farming's 2040 Goal, it was published after quite a lot of internal debate about what would go into this ambition. So the initial announcement came out of the Oxford Farming Conference in January 2019 from Minette Batters, NFU President. We produced this strategy document then in September, and NFU Cymru produced a Welsh translation version more relevant to Welsh agricultural policy goals the following year. But essentially, same kind of structure. We've got to put this in context. There is a global challenge out there. UK hosting next year in Glasgow, COP26, International Climate Summit. 5 years on, essentially, from the Paris Agreement, and it's time for all nations of the world to come forward with what are called their enhanced nationally determined contributions. So raising their level of ambition every 5 years to show how the world as a whole is going to achieve this goal and limit global temperature rise to certainly 2 degrees, perhaps 1.5 degrees, in order to minimize environmental damage and impacts and so on. So that's the global challenge. Within that, then we have the UK goal and understanding our role within the overall UK inventory. No, we're not the first place to point your fingers, but we are a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. And yet we believe that while on the one hand we have these complex and slightly intractable biological emissions from food production, agriculture is also unique in that we potentially can store greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere. We can be part of delivering the solution by withdrawing those greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide in particular, stored in soils and vegetation, and also through many supply chains in which we can participate to create so-called engineered removals of greenhouse gases. So more detail in that report about our approach, and the essential thing that we have to do this in partnership with government, in partnership with industries, a lot of cross-industry working groups and so on going on now as we warm up towards Glasgow, but also partnerships with environmental NGOs. Many of the bodies who would clearly support some of these intentions, such as enlarging hedgerows and having more use of the tree cover, the woodlands, and what we might call the agroforestry layer within the agricultural sector. And the last point on that slide is really the critical importance of being able to measure what we do. So having access to carbon calculators, having good data on what the UK baseline is for our, ranking globally, if you like, in terms of, the carbon footprint of wheat produced in the UK, or the carbon footprint of red meat produced within the UK. Very important that we understand our standing and that we can do benchmarking for English and Welsh and other parts of the UK agricultural producers, so that they know how well they're doing against their peers. So bringing this thing to life now, a number of things that you can find on the NFU website, nfuonline.com. There's the main URL at the bottom of that slide anyway. So 26 ways in which farmers are doing their bit for net zero. 26 for COP26, you get the idea. So it is about leading by example, and clearly we're doing a lot more than this. These are documented case studies which are in a sort of e-booklet that you can access through the website. And we're going to be enlarging them with things like video content and making it a little bit more multimedia and accessible. Very important, particularly at the time when we can't actually go out and visit other people's farms. Beyond that, other things. This is the so-called Year of Climate Action at the present time. One of our latest initiatives. Please go and visit the website and have a look at this and pledge if you can. It's a farmer pledge. You're in for net zero because, and you can go in as an NFU or NFU Cymru member and tick the boxes and show the sort of things that you've just recently done on your farm or that you're about to be doing, things that take us on that journey towards net zero. There's no expectation that every farm will actually be at net zero or will counterbalance all of its ambitions, all of its emissions, but this is an industry goal as a whole. Some will be able to do more, some will be able to do less, some are just embarking upon this journey. Some of this are things that people have been doing for years. So here's a great Welsh example, and goodness me, who's that alongside John Davies, Cymru president there in the background? It is none other than Alok Sharma, the president of COP26 and the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So he actually came out on a farm in North Wales there, hosted by Llyr Jones, NFU Cymru member, in August, and he got a good write-up, and they planted a tree, and Alok Sharma said, I understand that agriculture has a really important role to play in COP26 in getting the economy to net zero. And there are some great, some great additional coverage, which was up on one of the publicity, the media websites. Some video already shot by Clear Jones and his associates on their farm, showing how much they have diversified their business, getting into poultry production, as well as upland livestock, as well as having a lot of on-farm renewable energy. And there's Clear himself walking around talking about it in a video, which is available, at least at the present time, it's available through some of the public media. So there are many examples of this kind of thing. This is very much what we want to see people emulating as we move forward. So quick bit about the science. Those are the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture in the UK on the left-hand bar. Only 10% of it is carbon dioxide. About half is methane, mostly from ruminant livestock digestion systems. And then the balance, about 35%, nitrous oxide from a variety of sources, but mostly labile nitrogen in the soil, whether of organic or inorganic origin, being denitrified by soil bacteria. How are we going to counterbalance that? Well, at least at the moment, this is our plan. We believe we can get about a quarter of the way there through what we're going to call Pillar 1, productivity improvements. We believe we can get about another quarter of the way down there through exercising and maxing out on farmland carbon storage, so-called Pillar 2. And then the balance is about these so-called engineered greenhouse gas removals. Many things that we can do through a bio-based economy, locking up carbon in long-lived carbon-based in industrial and consumer products, or supplying bioenergy, which is displacing fossil fuel energy out of our national energy system. And there they are summarized in text for you. Pillar 1, which is all about productivity, remember, doing more with less, not compromising food production. So, where we have a comparative advantage, we want to exercise that comparative advantage. Using less resources and bringing down the emissions which are associated with the use of those inputs. Pillar 2 then, enhanced hedgerows, tree planting, boosting soil organic matter. Pillar 3, BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And we've just seen an announcement from the Prime Minister about some likely new investments in the creation of carbon storage clusters, which we hope to be able to participate in. But it's important perhaps that we can try and put some of this in the hands of farmers at small scale, not just about supplying raw materials to large scale supply chains. And then perhaps in the future, other really interesting technologies and things we may be able to do, like land spreading novel soil amendments, such as biochar, or minerals that carry out enhanced mineral weathering and capture carbon dioxide into carbonates in the soil. So there we are. This is my last slide. Key thing it comes down to are, what do we want from government in the agricultural sector? And we can, again, boil down many of those asks into things that fit against those 3 pillars. So in order to drive productivity, we must have support for investment in new technology, countryside productivity grants, that kind of thing, new technology, and the infrastructure, the all-important infrastructure to support that new technology, whether it's digital infrastructure, broadband and mobile coverage, and GPS and all the rest of it, or whether it is access to the energy infrastructure that enables us to be much more energy self-sufficient and to use new technologies, perhaps even electric agricultural vehicles in the future. Second ask, in order to be able to have delivery on carbon storage on farm, perhaps through the new environmental land management scheme in England, access to a robust carbon price, or at the very least, government officials using carbon pricing as the basis for the rewards that they will pay farmers for the delivery of those public goods. And then lastly, in order to have those bioeconomy-based greenhouse gas removals, we must have a strong domestic bioenergy supply chain that embraces a wide range of different bioenergy resources. So thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Iain.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for getting us started. So there's a number of questions that are picking up, that are accumulating in the chat. So perhaps, Jonathan, if you can have a look at those while we're going through some of the other talks, and then we'll have a sort of broader panel discussion when we have the end of the talks. So the next speaker in the session is John Davis from Hybu Nghyd Cymru, who's head of the industry development team there, and he's going to be giving us, I guess, the perspective from the sector in Wales on that. So, John, are you able to share your?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you very much. Apologies to people watching. I think there's a bit of there will be a bit of PowerPoint fatigue, I think, by the end of this, but I've got some slides as well. Hopefully you can all see that. If somebody can just nod so that I'm content that people can see that.
Yep,
yes,
we can see that.
Great stuff. Quick introduction, I'm John Richards, work for Nghyd Cymru, Meat Promotion Wales. That's the red meat levy body here in Wales. I work as part of the industry development team, and I'm the industry development and relations manager. So our role is to kind of support the industry, and that's from production and processing with regards to efficiency gains and also where to ensure that we continue to produce what the market requires. What I've done today is, we've got quite a lot of speakers today, so I've just put some slides together, kind of the work that we do and how we see this could be important and will be important moving forward. Under the title, I've taken a bit of taken the title and changed it a bit to make my presentation fit within it, which is the Welsh red meat sector in a zero carbon society. I'm sure over the last few days you would have had a lot of presentations on this kind of subject, but where does this all come from? This is the IPCC report, which was last year, and just taken some of the information in that. And the main kind of points there is, land is under pressure, under human pressure, and we have all got a society responsibility to ensure that global warming doesn't go or is kept under control, or certainly is reduced if possible, but certainly kept to reasonable levels. And some of the key themes that come through on that revolves around food waste, food security, reforestation, global contrast, desertification, global diets, and more sustainable farming methods. And where we come from as far as HCC, we think actually us in Wales have got a very good story to say, and actually can meet most of those, and actually those challenges which are set there, we can actually meet and actually flourish with that moving forward. This is Deborah Roberts. She's the co-chair of that working group, and these lines probably aren't always communicated when we're talking about the report, but balanced diets featuring plant-based foods such as coarse grains, legumes, fruits and vegetables. And this is the important bit for us, obviously being a red meat levy body, and animal sourced food produced sustainably in low greenhouse gas emission system present major opportunities for adaptation to a limiting climate change. And reading how it was reported, you could easily be excused for not thinking those lines were in it, that actually animal source food is part of the solution, and it's identified within the document. And as I said, we in Wales have got a very good story to say, and we can develop on it. And I think over the next few slides, I'll probably show where we are and our thinking within this. So the challenge is well known, and I apologize for going over the basics, but I think it's quite important to do that before we move into what the potential solutions are, is to feed a growing population. That's not just on a UK basis, but on a global basis. But the second part of that, in a globally responsible way, we need to ensure that we're producing the right food in the right place, and that food has got the nutritional quality and benefits that it requires as we increase, and the resources that we have at our disposal, be that environmental or whichever resources, are going to be strained by the time we get to 2050. So we have to ensure that we are doing the right thing in a globally responsible way. Capital and enhance natural resources. We in Wales have got a very obvious natural resource. We only have to look out of our windows to see it, which is the kind of environment that we work in, and the environment that we live in, and the kind of grass and the topography and geography that we've got. The next part is obviously not to rest on our laurels, and research and implement new techniques and technologies that maximize our efficiency and lower emissions. Those two go hand in hand. We can, as an industry, we need to become more profitable. That is understandable, but also by becoming more profitable, there is a strong correlation there about how resource efficient we become and where we stand on our kind of greenhouse gas emissions. But ultimately, and this is where we are a nation that produces food, we have to give our consumers confidence that red meat as part of a diet, and when it's farmed in a certain way, when produced and managed sustainably, is actually part of the solution. I've listened to quite a few of these webinars over the last few days in the conference, and you can pick up there's a common theme in that everybody's got slightly different aspects or ways of looking at it, but actually we can be part of this solution. There's no need to change entirely. We just need to adapt possibly how we do some things, but actually accentuate the positives in other ways that we currently produce red meat. What are we doing as part of HCC now? I've taken the liberty here of putting a few slides together about some of the projects we're doing, and we've put together this red meat development program, and it's quite a unique project in that and program in that it's a 5-year strategic initiative. So we've taken 3 subjects that we see are vitally important for us as a red meat sector, and developed projects around that are going to be measured and evidence gained from it that I hope can be developed in future to kind of deliver what the public wants and also what we as a nation need. All 3, and I'll explain the projects now, deliver sustainability goals, and all 3 seek to enhance Wales's reputation for producing sustainable and high quality beef and lamb. I'll go through those first. Hill Ram Scheme, first of all. What we have got in Wales, obviously, over 50% of it would be classified as hill, over 80% would be classified as upland or hill. So those are kind of regions of Wales, or regions that the options for that land use is limited. Grass is the natural one. You only have to look at the amount of rainfall that we have as a country and the geography of our kind of landscape to understand that it is. And if we talk about producing food in a globally responsible way, when you produce that level of grassland, obviously having ruminants on it would be one of the most efficient ways of turning that grass into a product that can actually be consumed. And for us, with our Hill Ram Scheme, what we're doing is investing in new technology that can actually support hill and upland farmers to investigate genetic improvement gains that can be done on their farms. And the ultimate aims of this, and this is through TSU sampling, which is just taking a small little year tag and matching then the lambs to the mothers and the father and the rams. And then you can actually understand the performance of those. And the important thing is that it can be done in the natural environment, because one thing, the sheep thrive in those hills, and they do thrive in the hills, but actually it is quite a challenging place to farm as well. So what we want to do is ensure that the systems that we have are suited to the environment that they're in. So the long-term goals and aims of these projects is a more resilient hill sector, continued supply of lambs that meet consumer demand, and that we have this upland and hill sector that continues to be managed effectively, because obviously we've seen in areas where there is no livestock that you have got this shrub growth, and we all want an environment that we can easily work in and also enjoy. The second project that we've got is Stock Plus, and this seeks to promote proactive flock and herd health management. We already in Wales and the UK have got a reputation for producing animals to a high standard as far as animal welfare and sustainability. But what we want to do is enhance that again, again, not rest on our laurels, and that the project seeks to ensure that farmers and vets work together on a proactive kind of approach towards animal health planning. And what you'll have there is a higher efficiency and greater use of preventative treatment. We're already seeing results of that come out through this kind of project. All this is very positive, and the consumer kind of needs, wants, expects this kind of high level and standard, and that is exactly what we want to achieve and continue to achieve. Welsh Lamb Meat Quality Project. This project is unique in that what we're looking to do is work with our consumers, and we do consumer taste trials to understand what variances there are within Welsh Lamb, and also kind of what the consumer preference towards that is. And all that is driven by trying to ensure that when we produce the product, that it's the product that the consumer wants, needs, demands, expects. And how you do that is by going to the consumer and asking, you know, these are the different ways that the lamb has been produced, and you do the consumer taste trials. What you can do then is actually understand what the consumer wants, and also ensure that what we are producing is exactly what the consumer wants. What that reduces, and if you go back to one of the first slides, food waste, lowering food waste and enhancing the reputation, the already high reputation of PGI Welsh lamb. The second part of that is actually the nutritional quality of lamb. And particularly lamb reared off grass. We've done the first year trial, and if anybody's interested, if they go onto our website, there's the results of the first year, and what that's shown is actually the nutritional quality of lamb reared on grass is particularly high. And you know, these are the kind of benefits that we need to be given to the consumers and understanding. That will lower food waste and increase carcass utilization. Both of those will be drivers for kind of a higher sustainability and profitability within the supply chain. What that ultimately does is support a vibrant and profitable production and processing sector. And that is really important to us as well, because a lot of the time when we think about lamb and beef production, we think about the primary production element of it, but there's also the processing sector, which is a highly valuable sector for us in Wales as far as jobs and incomes. So we need to ensure that we support that as well. Research, we do a lot of work in HCC with regards to research, because obviously we won't move forward as an industry unless we continue to do this kind of activity. And what we need to do is kind of evolve our systems according to what the research shows. GrassCheck GB, I know Mark's going to speak in a second, but GrassCheck GB is a project that we as HCC are doing along with the other levy bodies and working with CL. And we're doing that project, which is involving looking at grass growth in Wales and obviously the UK. And what we're trying to do is ensure that, you know, when we are got ruminants, that we are using grass as efficiently as we can, and the results from that will be very important. And already we're starting to see that we in Wales do grow a lot of grass, and what we probably need and want to do is improve the kind of grass utilization that we do, which ultimately leads to efficiency gains. Determining the potential for precision grazing. We do hear a lot about precision grazing these days, and again, it's about grassland utilization. It's about making sure that we make the best use of our natural resource. This is very, this is a PhD, this next project that I'm mentioning there, strategies to reach zero carbon sheep and beef production on Welsh farms, and that is something that we will be doing a lot of work on over the next few years and taking very seriously. Greenhouse gas measurements, I'm sure it's been mentioned during the conference, but while we've got data at the moment, what we always need to do is interpret that data and go back just to make sure that science is correct. There's a lot of good work come out of Oxford University when looking at greenhouse gas measurements and what they actually mean, and the argument that's there about methane being a short-lived gas. And when we're doing our calculations, we're comparing it to other gases that are in the atmosphere for hundreds of years compared to methane, which is in the atmosphere for 10 to 12 years. And these are very important that we continue to go back and look at the science. And then traceability. We've mentioned earlier about food kind of security and traceability. There's a piece of work that we're doing now, which is actually leading in the kind of lamb production side, which means that we've got a fingerprint for what Welsh lamb is, and what we can do is actually take lamb, be it anywhere in the kind of from processing onwards, and we can take that lamb and test it and be assured that once people have Welsh lamb, that they are confident that that Welsh lamb has actually originated from Welsh farms, which is vital for us as there's more pressures going to become on the supply chain to ensure that we are producing and that we have got that traceability in the system. Next steps, and sorry, this is a whistle-stop tour, but the next step, in the next few weeks, beginning of December, we will be launching a document, which is an evidence-driven document, which is looking at what the potential for reducing emissions in agriculture and actually the positive contribution that agriculture and red meat production plays for Wales and the wider environment. What we do in there is we look at measures at how we can reduce GHGs, because this is quite important that, you know, while we have got very efficient production systems, there's still room for improvement, and that's something that we need to do as a sector, is to look for those improvements. Also, you know, and I'm sure it's been mentioned before, we are in a very unique position where we can actually be carbon sinks, we can absorb, and the carbon sequestration element needs to be highlighted and actually maximize the ability to do that. Also renewable energy, and we've already had a presentation on that, so I won't go too much into that, while encouraging biodiversity and increasing and enhancing the kind of water and air quality that we've got in Wales. So I think I've taken the liberty of being more than 8 minutes, so I apologise for that to the chair, but hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of an inclination of kind of the work that we do and where we see the red meat sector in Wales can be, not just in 2050, but these are kind of processes that we need to do over the next 5, 10, 20 years on all the way up to that 2050. Yeah.
So, Diolch, John, thank you for that. So, if we can, I guess we are a little bit behind. So hopefully we can catch up with the rest of the talks. So, the next presentation is from Mark Young, who's head of innovation at SEAL, which is the Centre for Excellence or Centre for Innovation Excellence in Livestock. So Mark, are you able to share your screen? Wonderful, we can see that, thank you. You're muted though, I think.
And I've just lost the screen for me at the moment. There it is. Right, thanks very much, Ian. To get on with some pace, it's great that we've had the scene well set by Jonathan and John. They've pointed out several points that I'll reinforce, but it's great to have had that introduction. Thank you. So CL is one of the government agri-tech centres, and we've recently produced a report looking at net zero carbon for UK livestock, which you can download from our website. So this has got a lot more information than I'm going to present today, but feel free to go there to get that. I'll be leaving a set PDF of these slides with the organisers for people who want to be able to get a hold of them. So why commission the report? Well, we want to inform the debate about climate change and roles of livestock. And there's some interesting points that have already been brought up by John and Jonathan about agriculture that we need to be thinking about in a broader context than just about emissions. However, emissions are the thing we need to be reducing. So it's an independent science and evidence-based summary. We commissioned 8 institutions to write it, and it's been endorsed by 14, 2 from Wales, it's University of Bangor, and the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology of Bangor. And what we've done is we've produced some benchmarks. We've looked for hotspots of emissions in different livestock systems and thinking about where we should focus our efforts to get gains. The scope is just carbon, this report, so it's not the broader range of sustainability that you've been hearing about at this conference and in the 2 previous talks and earlier sessions. And we've just restricted ourselves to Live UK for obvious reasons, because we're trying to help livestock farmers here. So livestock are not all equal, and this is something we need to be thinking about what the nature of those differences are. So ruminants and non-ruminants are the 2 big divisions here. Ruminants are specialised in being able to turn grass into high quality product. The chicken and poultry industry, the natural attribute they've got that we exploit is the very high reproductive rate. So one maternal unit can produce lots of offspring or eggs in the case of chickens that can be used for the food supply system. That high reproductive rate also means genetics has led to very intense selection, and we've got very efficient, fast growth out of these animals. The other thing about the animal food is it's highly nutritious, and John's touched upon this with one of their projects. And it's for protein and for human diet, it's a highly nutritious, it's nutrient dense, it's not just protein, there's other attributes too, as he's described for the hill lamb. And it complements plant foods in the human diet. So it has its place. Like all mammals, they produce carbon dioxide. You and I produce carbon dioxide. The challenge we've got is the ruminants, the sheep and the cattle, also produce methane. And it's these greenhouse gases that receive the most attention. But as was brought up by Jonathan in his talk, there's a third one, which is nitrous oxide, which comes around from how we manage manures and how we use nitrogen fertilizers, and it's given off from soils. So the non-ruminants are highly efficient. The challenge we've got is they compete with the human food chain for land. And so arable land could be producing feed for a chicken and pig industry, or it could be producing human food. Conversely, ruminants are sometimes portrayed as being less efficient, but they convert plant fiber that you and I can't digest into high quality protein. So this is what I call upcycling. So they're actually turning that grass grown on those hills where John pointed out we can't readily crop to produce human food crops, but they turn it into a very high quality product and they do the harvesting for us. So we've got this bold goal that Jonathan talked about. This 64% reduction is the one for the UK. NFU have actually shortened the time frame for that. So the UK objective is 2050. NFU have said let's go for 2040 for agriculture. What we found with the look at the technologies available, so we can only deliver 38% of that goal by 2050, and that 38% of 64% is just a 24% reduction in the emissions we currently produce. Not only that, in order to achieve that, we have to have very high uptake across the farming livestock farms in the UK. So it's a fairly big ask to actually deliver that with what we currently know. So what can we do that will help? Let's have a look at some of the hot spots. So if we look at the dairy system, and we've got 3 columns here, C1, C2 and C3 in this table. They represent farms where the cows spend different proportions of time outdoors. So the predominantly grazing group is C1, 270 days outdoor, through to fully housed systems at C3, which spend most of their life indoors. It doesn't mean they're not eating grass. They'll be eating it probably as silage. That's the predominant way they'll be eating it. So we see differences in the milk yield here. But when we look at where the carbon load is coming from, not a lot of it's coming from the feed. It's mostly coming from methane, from the rumens, from methane from the manure that we manage, and also from nitrous oxide, which is partly to do with manure spread onto the ground and partly from nitrogen fertilizers. If we look at the total carbon footprints, you can see the more extensive systems have a slightly higher carbon footprint per kilogram of product. And that's mostly to do with the yield of those different systems, how much milk each cow is producing relative to the cost of keeping her going through the year. So when we look at sheep, we see a similar story, going from hill, the more extensive, to lowland, the more intensive. We see a lower carbon footprint per kilogram of live weight, which is equivalent to the kilogram per meat, as we go into the more intensive systems. But again, the common thing across these 3 systems is the carbon load is coming from the rumen methane and nitrous oxide from the soils, which is a consequence of manure on the ground and nitrogen fertilizers to keep those pastures going. Let's compare that to poultry as an example. If you look here, the manure embedding, that's effectively to do with emissions related to the manure of the animals, and it's a very small proportion compared to that and the methane, which we see for the sheep and the cattle. So they don't produce significant amounts of methane. The big thing here for poultry is this very high proportion of their carbon cost comes from the feed and the water that they use to keep those systems going. So there's a big contrast here. For ruminants, as we expect, the major hotspots are rumen methane and nitrous oxide, and poultry and pigs produce a little bit of methane and have a lower carbon footprints, but their feeds are major hotspots. If we look at the global warming potential of these products on a pure kilograms of carbon dioxide produced per kilogram of product, milk wins the race hands down. So this is a great thing for dairy farmers. They can claim the moral high ground. They're ahead of the poultry industry, which is so highly efficient. The pork and the lamb and the beef are lagging behind. But if we actually look at it in terms of the protein content, we know that milk has got a lot of water in it. So per kilogram isn't the best way to measure your carbon loading relative to what you're producing in terms of human nutrient value. If we adjust for that just simply by looking at protein percentage, we can see that chicken is the most efficient, and the global warming potential on the green side of the graph looks like beef to milk is 25 to 1, whereas when we adjust for protein percentage, it's 2.5 to 1. So we're seeing that you have to also look at what you're producing and the qualities of that. Now, we talked before about arable land and the fact that the non-ruminants are competing for arable land. The three highest graphs here are looking at how many square meters you need to produce 100 grams of meat. And the three highest are all from the systems which are feeding concentrates. So those concentrates are grown on arable land, and that arable land could be used for food, for human food. But in this case, we're devoting some of our arable land to the crops for the animals. If we add into that the concept we looked at in the previous table about density and nutrient density, it exaggerates it more. And suddenly we see what the forte is of the ruminants, particularly when they're in predominantly in a grazing situation. They have a very low usage of that land, which is very good for human food production, the arable land, very low usage of that relative to the nutrients they produce. And they have some other attributes. As John said, they're very suited to certain country where we can grow grass really well, but you can't get machines and other apparatus across to harvest that food easily. So in terms of the opportunities that the report identified, it said in order to look forward, we need to be improving our efficiency. The one caveat you have to put in there is the one John made, without increasing emissions, but more significantly, because we want to reduce emissions, we'll see efficiency gains, but we can't have efficiency gains if they result in increased emissions. And that would be a situation where for the same number of cows, you produce more milk from them. That would give you less emissions per kilogram of milk, but more total emissions. We can't go down that path. We're going to need to look at that through genetics in terms of meat animals, their growth rate, the number of, the length of their life while they're growing has a big impact on it. And also health. Good health systems are important because animals will produce better, more efficiently, and they won't be having to put energy into fighting infection or some other challenge. We need to be looking at novel feeds and alternative feeds. These may be to reduce emissions from the rumen in terms of methane, or it might be tailoring the protein content of feed so the animals more easily turn what's in the feed into product, and there's less lost as nitrous oxide and methane. We need to look at how we best use nitrogen fertilizers. Some people would argue we should be looking at more legumes and pastures to reduce our reliance on nitrogen fertilizers, but certainly we need to be targeting how we use them, and that is probably leading into the next point about precision livestock farming. How do we target where that fertilizer is best used? So we can use smart technology. We can look at individual animals in farms where it's cost effective and tailor both nutrition and health programs to them. And we can also look at it for things like management of nutrients across the landscape. Carbon sequestration has been brought up, and I was very pleased that the previous speakers brought up the idea of hedgerows and woodlands. People talk about soil a lot, but there's other places you can store carbon on the farm, and we need to be able to account for that. I'm told some of the systems that we have currently, farmers get no credit for that. If farmers are managing their carbon well and building up reserves, that needs to be accounted for and credited to them. And lastly, for farmers to do this well, we need some good carbon accounting tools so that they can measure, monitor and manage this system. And at the moment, we've got tools that are there, but they need to be improved. So finally, the take-home message, the big one is current technology isn't going to deliver the goal we've got in terms of reducing the emissions now. And this was signposted by both Richard and Jonathan. We need innovation. The current goal we've got assumes quite high, the current level of achievement we're predicting is high rates of uptake. That isn't happening at the moment. So we need to both stimulate that uptake as well as invest in innovation. So we want widespread and early adoption. That'll probably require support and incentives. And the greater need for innovation. We need good ideas, we need people willing to try them, and we need to support that. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mark. That was fantastic, thanks. So if you can unshare the screen, then the next speaker we have this afternoon is Joe Gallagher from Aberystwyth University, who's going to talk about some of the other uses, in effect, of grassland and Joe heads up the biorefining activities at IBERS. Okay, thanks. We can. Let me just reduce that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is talk about grassland as a resource to drive the Welsh bioeconomy, and just bringing back the importance of grassland and for Wales. You know, we've talked about animal production. It can provide environmental benefits, but also supports tourism, but mainly it provides an income to rural communities. So what are the challenges? Well, as Jonathan mentioned, there's the drive towards a net zero, but there's also been a removal of the EU subsidies, which has a dramatic effect on farm incomes in Wales. And if we see a no-deal Brexit, then there's going to be a major effect on exporting live animals. So really what's needed, and people earlier have alluded to this, is to continue to reduce the emissions towards net zero, but also to improve the primary producer income. Additionally, what we want to do is to bring skilled jobs into the rural community, and also to, you know, encourage the entrepreneurial spirit. We need to reduce the dependency on imports, such as soya protein that's been used in a feed and directly into food. And as well as we need to continue grassland management and biodiversity. So look, thinking about the solutions, we've been working in sort of biorefining for the last 12 years. And what we've been looking at is new markets for grassland products while reducing carbon emissions and hopefully hitting the clean air targets so that Wales can attract some of the UK farm payments. Okay, so what we're looking at really is a system change. You know, grass feeds to animals, and the animals then go on to be food and produce other components. But what we're looking at is a different way of harvesting the material and a different way of processing it to give us food and other components, but also to provide a feedstock for animals. And we're looking to save greenhouse gas, reduce greenhouse gases and also nitrous oxide emissions. So if we look at forage crops, they sequester carbon all year round. There's no annual ploughing to release CO2. They protect soil against erosion and minimize nutrient leakage. But one of the important things they also do is they sequester an awful lot of carbon, particularly below ground, and they provide a continuous habitat for wildlife. If we look at the legume, now I'm talking about the clovers, they can reduce the need for putting mineral nitrogen fertilizer onto the soil, and also they improve soil structure. And the clovers can also be grown as companion crops with grasses, so supplying the nitrogen that the grass needs for growth. And additionally, clovers, particularly red clover, will encourage pollinators such as bees. But if we look at it from a food and nutraceutical point of view, you know, perennial forages have got high levels of protein, up to about 80% dry matter, and 40 to 50% of this can be extracted from the crop using simple methods because it's relatively soluble. Grass species accumulate sugars at very high levels, and in this case in the form of fructans, and these are a source of not only sugars for fermentation but also for prebiotics. Clovers will accumulate pinnitol, which is a sugar alcohol that benefits diabetes, and red clover accumulates a lot of phytoestrogens, and they've got value as health supplements. So what we can do is we can take the grass or the clover, we simply put it through a screw press to squeeze out the juice, and basically what you're left with then is a rich juice that contains between 40 and 50% of the plant protein, but about 65% of the soluble sugars. And you're left then with a pressed fiber, which contains the remainder of the protein and the soluble sugars. So what we can do with the juice is, if we just simply take the juice, put it through a pasteurizer and then centrifuge it, what we get out is denatured protein. So it's a bit like, the pasteurizer is a bit like eating an egg. Then you centrifuge out the particulate and you get a denatured protein. But you also get a very rich sugar broth, which can be used to produce a range of products. And we've looked at bioethanol, we've looked at lactic acid for bio-based plastics and a whole range of other platform chemicals, but you also get very good mineral recovery.
Alternatively, we can take the juice and we can put it through a membrane filtration system and filter off the proteins that way. And these give us non-denatured proteins, which have a higher market value. So if we think about grass biorefining, and these are the outputs that we're particularly interested in. If we look at a farm with 100 hectares, we can get fiber of about 3,500 tons. We get about 50 to 70 tons of extracted protein. And we also get fructan. And the fructan we can simply convert to a prebiotic version, producing about 122 tons from our 100 hectares. And the prebiotics have a much higher value. They're at about between 1,000 and 21,000 pounds a ton, depending if they go into the animal or into the human market. So if we think about the protein that you get from grasses and from clovers, here in this table, I've got the amino acid composition really of essential important amino acids. And here we're comparing soya to red clover and ryegrass. And what you can see is that the amino acids from the red clover and the ryegrass are comparable to those that you find in soya. And in the case of threonine and tryptophan, there's actually higher levels. So this protein can be used as a dairy supplement. It can be used to go into monogastric diets, replacing soya or arable sources. But it also can go into human diets, particularly into ready meals. And this is sort of meeting the need of the growing demand from the consumers for plant-based proteins. The pressed fiber, there's a number of things you can do with that. The first thing, you can feed it to animals. You can stick it into an anaerobic digestion system, or you can convert it to biocomposites. Additionally, you can go down the lignocellulose feedstock route and produce biofuels and bioplastics. But it's this animal production side that I want to just quickly mention. So we can take grass, put it to a screw press to get our juice with our protein and sugars, and leaving us the remainder of the fiber. So what we can do is we can ensile the fiber. It ensiles very easily, and we can also ensile grass. So what we've done is we've taken 12 sets of twin lambs. We fed one set on ensiled grass and the other on ensiled pressed fiber. And after the growth experiments, what we found was both groups had very similar weight gains and very similar musculature, indicating that the fiber is as good as the full grass. This has also been confirmed in other recent studies, looking at cows, where they looked at beef production and also milk production. 2 studies in Ireland and 1 study in Denmark. And the Irish study found additionally that there was a 20% improvement in nitrogen use efficiency, with more nitrogen going into the milk and less to emissions. Okay, to summarize quickly then, talking about and looking at grass biorefining as a system change for Wales, you still maintain the landscapes and the environmental advantages of the forage crops, but you're now offering alternative markets to support the rural economy and looking to create skilled jobs in the biorefineries. We can provide protein for the growing human market while offsetting soy imports. We can still support animal and milk production with better nitrogen use efficiency. And we can align it into AD systems for additional environmental benefits. This way of processing also allows good nutrient recovery. And the sugars can be used not just as prebiotics, but for us, that's where the market value is, but can also be used to produce a range of platform chemicals, including biofuels and other chemicals. So just want to say then as a take-home message, and it was Iain who alluded to this, that grass is to Wales for the future, as oil was to OPEC in the past. It's a natural resource that can help drive its economy. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that, Joe. The final speaker we have in the session is Judith Thornton, who's also at Aberystwyth University and is a low carbon manager. So I guess, Joe, can you unshare your screen, and Judith, are you able to share yours?
Okay, can we see my screen?
Yep, we can see that.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Great. Okay, so I guess I just wanted to kind of broaden things back out again and look at what else society is going to be doing in 2050, and what that might mean for the role of agriculture and farmers. Please don't interpret this as me trying to tell farmers what to do. I don't farm myself. I'd be hopeless at it. It's more a case of getting across some of the changes that are happening elsewhere in society and sort of thinking about how that might influence what the opportunities and constraints are for farmers. So zero carbon society is going to look very different in some ways to where we are at the moment. The first point there, decarbonised electricity production. I mean, we know largely what this looks like. It's about renewable electricity generation from wind and solar, and obviously possibly some tidal lagoons and wave power developments, and maybe even some nuclear as well. But as well as that, we need to decarbonise our other energy uses. So that is going to require a mass electrification of both transport and home heating. So our electricity demand is actually going to go up quite a lot. So, you know, we heard this week that by 2030, they're going to ban the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles. And that's compared to a 7% use of electric vehicles at the moment. So really quite major changes elsewhere in society. Third point there, we're also going to have to sequester quite a lot of carbon. There's sort of several different ways of looking at this. I mean, firstly, there are sectors of the economy that are, whether we like it or not, going to be hard to decarbonise. So stuff like steel production and aviation. Secondly, there's kind of wider benefits to carbon sequestration that mean we probably should be doing it anyway. So peatland restoration being a classic example. So this isn't about necessarily a massive technological solution, sort of carbon hoovers sucking CO2 out of the sky. This is, you know, a lot of this is actually about using photosynthesis to do what photosynthesis is quite good at, which is taking CO2 from the air and transferring it into other forms. And third thing about carbon sequestration is we do need to look at carbon sequestration as a sort of a massive environmental cleanup operation. In the same way that we think about how to clean up other parts of the environment, we need to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. And the fourth point there, you know, Joe alluded to it, products and services without fossil fuels. So this is going to be a complete transformation of how we make the stuff that we use on a day-to-day basis. So in terms of what this means of farming in practice, this massively broadens out the roles of what we're expecting farmers to have to do. So, I mean, farmers obviously see themselves as providers of food. Many farmers also see themselves as providing ecosystem services, and that's quite that does look as if it's going to become sort of a more obvious part of agricultural payment schemes in the future. Jonathan and probably somebody else with a J in their name also alluded to this earlier about the energy production role that farmers are going to have. And then obviously we have carbon sequestration, and carbon pricing is certainly going to offer farmers an opportunity to sequester carbon on soil. I'm not suggesting sequestering farmers into soil, sorry. That last point there, farmers as providers of other products. So we're going to be making all sorts of products. All of the stuff that we consume will need to be made out of materials which aren't fossil fuel based. So in terms of the carbon sequestration then, farmers are absolutely key to what the UK government wants to do in terms of carbon sequestration. So this graph shows what the UK Committee on Climate Change thinks we're going to be doing in terms of methods of sequestering carbon by 2050. And, you know, the use of wood in construction, that's going to need farmers and foresters. Soil carbon sequestration, again, that's going to need farmers. Biomass energy with carbon capture and storage, that will need farmers. Habitat restoration, afforestation, biochar, all of these require buy-in from farmers. So farming is, as I say, going to be more about a lot more than food production. From the biomass perspective, that's going to be quite a challenge for us in the UK. So the biggest sort of part of the way the CCC imagine us to be sequestering carbon in the future is going to be from biomass energy with carbon capture and storage. And we are already running a huge feedstock deficit in the UK. We're importing far more biomass into the UK than we're actually able to produce ourselves at the moment. And obviously, as our use of biomass energy with carbon and capture and storage increases, that sort of feedstock deficit potentially gets much worse. So something we're really into in Aberystwyth, obviously, is the use of perennial biomass crops. And the Committee on Climate Change would like to see approximately 10% of agricultural land under perennial biomass crops by 2050. And on the left there, we've got miscanthus, and on the right there, we've got willow. And there may also be a role to play for poplar in that future scenario. There are other means of sequestering carbon. One of the ones I've got a personal interest in is the extent to which we can sequester carbon in plant-based products. So it's going to be a fairly small part of the total carbon that we need to sequester in the UK, but nevertheless, it's potentially another opportunity. So biorefining, turning plants into products. This is sort of what Joe was talking about in relation to grass. But obviously, it's about much more than grass. There's all sorts of things we can make out of grass, but all of our other natural materials that we have in Wales can get processed into chemicals, fuels, plastics, and that kind of thing. And in the future, when we're not able to use fossil fuels for this purpose, we are going to be running a plant-based economy. And, you know, we've run plant-based economies in the past, and we're going to have to do so again in the future. But the big advantage we've got now is that we do actually have quite a lot more technology and quite a lot more scientific understanding of how to convert some of those plants into end products. Just a word really about global responsibility. This is a map of the world showing the world's biggest movements of goods and services expressed in terms of their CO2 emissions. So there's this massive arrow you can see going from China to the US. That is basically the US importing stuff from China. And the second biggest arrow there is Europe importing stuff, again from China. So it's very important that we, as we consider how to decarbonize the UK economy, we don't just bypass that responsibility and offshore emissions to other countries. So to finish with, what do we think this might look like on the ground? And I think, to be honest, the Welsh countryside doesn't need to look drastically different. I mean, some of us might want it to look different in places, but you know, it might be that we're on about 10% of perennial biomass crops by 2050, and maybe another 10% of you know, cereals or horticulture. But I guess the key point is that agriculture is going to be a key part of the future economy in Wales, more important to the Welsh economy than it is today. And whilst food production is going to carry on as being a key function for the agricultural industry in Wales, we, as society, we do need it to be able to do a lot more than providing us with food. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Judith. That's great, and thank you to all the speakers. So we've been having quite a lot of questions and comments in the chat, and thanks to a number of the speakers who've been putting in some responses into the chat as well, while the later speakers have been talking. I guess there's probably a number of themes that are coming through, so I'll try and pick up some of the main themes. So apologies if we don't cover everyone's question specifically, but I think we'll try and pick up some of the main themes. So Jonathan, if I can first with you, there's a number of questions, I guess, really around that perspective of obviously that, you know, in effect, if you like, a UK agricultural approach, and obviously the NFU and NFU Cymru's approach to that, and obviously the fact that agriculture in Wales is different and its ability to deliver on net zero or capacity to do that's going to be different. So do you have a sort of response to that kind of thing in terms of what the approach of the NFU is in that, in terms of specifically thinking about the challenges that exist in Wales relative to across the UK, and how you perhaps perceive that in terms of what might be happening maybe at a government level in terms of a overall agricultural strategy as well?
Yeah, well, certainly we recognise that, for example, the Committee on Climate Change can see Wales as having a slightly distinctly different capacity to attain net zero, perhaps at a different speed from the rest of the UK. Through our NFU Cymru office in Builth, you know, certainly there is interaction there with the Welsh Assembly Government and its own work on developing a climate change plan, perhaps, you know, running a little bit behind the Westminster Government. But, you know, the intention is very much there, and it is extremely important that the nature of devolved government is reflected in these differentiated plans for getting to net zero.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I guess one of the other big questions, so probably for, I guess this is probably a question for John Richards, if you, I guess there's a number of themes coming through really around, I guess it's that balance of retailers and consumers in terms of the demands, and maybe you know, I guess the higher value cuts of meat versus other parts of the animal, in terms of how those can be used, and working with customers and supply chains to address that. So are you able to respond to that?
Yeah,
thanks, John.
Yeah, and I saw a bit of the conversation there, and you know, ultimately I think this is where again there's a slight misinterpretation of what happens. The consumer is ever so powerful in this, and the retailers will supply. And not just, and we're not just talking multiple retailers, we're talking about small independents and butchers will supply what the consumer wants. So there's a big area of work there, and it is an area of work that we're in, and also our levy compatriots, our levy body compatriots, but also I think everybody in the supply chain should, about requesting products. You know, the kind of temptation is to just take what's either on the shelf or in the fridges or in the freezers. You know, actually we've got a lot of responsibility as a society to actually ask the question, where does this come from? How is it reared? These type of questions, and also ask for different types of products. The challenge sometimes is for people to turn around and just say, well, if it's not there, it must be out of season type stuff. That's almost, if you like, a lazy argument, where we can be asking for these products, and you know, and the consumer, and you know, us as HUC are doing a lot of work there to kind of educate the consumer, or particularly make the consumer probably raise their voice a bit more about asking for the products, and you know, wanting to know kind of the nutritional qualities of the different products. And you know, this is a very important piece of work, and you know, at the moment we've got a lot of food programs. You only have to switch on the TV on a Saturday morning, and one of the other channels has got some kind of program, which cookery program or chefs cooking. There's a bit of that kind of. I was muted there. The one thing that's happened with COVID is actually people are cooking at home and spending time cooking at home. So there is an opportunity for us to take advantage of this opportunity now and actually drive on those messages about sustainably produced red meat is actually very important in a diet. And that's where you come back to that, looking again, and we've mentioned it a few times about globally responsible ways of producing food. That information that Judith showed was fantastic with regards showing where the importers are and where the exporters are. If we, and I saw a few comments and questions about should we just lower our stocking rate? As long as we're careful which livestock we destock, if you like, let's pick the productive ones and produce off them. Absolutely no problem in that, because that supports profitability and also our climate change. But actually, let's not just offshore our problems by getting rid of livestock or looking for different land uses, which means we just import the product from somewhere else. I mean, ultimately, that would be a massive step backwards in our view.
Thank you very much for that, John. So I guess another question that's sort of come up a number of times really relates to around, I guess, the innovation. And I guess this question really around the, do we have enough time to do research and this balance of good enough? And that's come up in I guess, a number of forms, but maybe perhaps starting with you, Mark, and then perhaps go through the rest of the speakers, just get a feel about, how far away do you think we are from some of these technologies? What are the things that are coming up that we can actually start, addressing some of these big challenges now, rather than just necessarily this is something that's, decades away.
Some of the things that Jonathan brought out about carbon capture, not established technologies, but they're good ideas, and what we need to be doing is rolling them out and seeing what they're capable of. An example is biochar. You can put biochar into soil and it's not sort of adding structure, it's carbon and soil, it's not adding the structure which we think of as good soil health. How much can we put that into soils before we've reached the limit of it being a productive soil? I see there's a recent report that says some of the straight air capture and turning it into carbon and pumping it underground, that may not be quite as good as people thought, but at least they're testing it. I think the key ones will be things like we used to use or rely on the pastures to produce their own nitrogen much more than we do now. We need to go back to thinking about that. We need to be thinking more about the aspects I think John referred to about using other parts of the animal to get more circularity into our system, because we've got a system that's very linear at the moment. We need to be looking at how we can capture some of the outflows of carbon and use them rather than putting them on a truck and sending them somewhere else. In terms of new technologies that are going to suddenly pull a lot of carbon out of the air, I think the environmental initiatives that Judith referred to, and I think some of the other people talked about, where we actually manage our landscapes better, it's not so much a technology as in tech, as being able to have a better way of understanding the system and managing it, and using some tech to show that about the gains we're making. So the ability to measure is one of our limitations for a number of these key variables about the environment.
Right, thanks, Mark. So, Joe, do you want to give us a sort of a feel for in terms of how far away do you think these sort of technologies, or particularly the technologies you were showing us, are?
Yeah, I mean, they're developing. There are a number of pilot facilities that are going through doing the experimental, doing the numbers, collecting the data. There's some demonstration plants now being, one of them already up in Germany. Austria have got one up and running. There's been 2 recently funded flagships from Europe, one in Ireland, one in Denmark. So they are coming online. They are producing a lot of data. in one of these demonstration scale, they're actually it's mobile, and they take it around the farms and test it actually on farm. So they do the squeezing, the pressing on farm, leaving the fiber on farm, and then taking the juice for the processing. So yeah, they are coming. What we really need is a bit more investment to start getting up ourselves here in Wales up to demonstration scale. That's way we can convince the companies and the backers and the supply chains, you know, to get in behind it and to make it a reality. So yeah, in the next couple of years.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Joe. So we're getting closer to the end. So maybe perhaps just a minute then from Judith, and then on to Jonathan and John, if they want to have a final comment on, particularly on the innovation. So Judith. Okay,
I mean, I guess one of the things that's implicit really in the questions about innovation is, do we think technology is going to save us? I think the important thing for me is that we don't use technology as an excuse for not being very clear about what behaviour change is needed. And I think there's, you know, the CCC, you know, did steer away to an extent from talking about behaviour change, and I think that's a real shame. And I think it's very sort of prevalent at the moment that, you know, the government's announced this week its 10-point plan for tackling climate change, as if they feel it's really important, and then the next day they announce even more money for defence spending. So so I feel like we're not really in this. We're not even spending enough money. If we did want technology to save us, we're not going about it in the right way. We're not actually getting to that point very easily. And so I think as individuals, we do need to carry on with the behaviour change, and hope that actually some of these technologies do come on stream as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So then again, Jonathan and John, in that order.
Yeah, well, just coming up, you know, following on Judith's point, I think it is interesting. We know that, for example, on the 9th December, the Committee on Climate Change is going to be talking about their 6th carbon budget, which is where we might start to part company with some of the convergence we've had with their thinkers previously, because they're talking about really stretching goals for changing public behaviour, and some really stretching ideas around innovation in technology, lab-grown meat and stuff like that, which frankly we can't see happening in a big way within this really important 20 or 30-year timeline. But I think come back to what Judith was saying, though, about the resources that have to go behind the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, you know, setting some of these goals and so on, and leveraging private sector investment in things like offshore wind is great. But, you know, if the government's not prepared to spend enough, then it can have all the honourable targets it likes, and the resources simply won't be there to bring in all of these new technologies. But in terms of the plan, you know, we need all of these options on the table. It's the easy things that we can do around crop health and animal health to just boost our productivity. It's the relatively easy interventions that farmers can make in farming systems to embrace some of the aspects, at least, of regenerative agriculture and manage carbon stocks on the land better. But it is also about looking into the new technologies and the diversity and this sort of multifunctional land use, where you can have your wind farm and sheep grazing around it, or you can have your solar farm and poultry ranging under it, and you can you know, put agri-environmental measures into exactly the same fields as you are also boosting crop production. I think I'll leave it at that.
Brilliant, thanks. So very briefly then, John, have you got something?
The only thing I'll add to what's been said is, you know, we're talking about it like innovation and research would be unique to agriculture. I think it's across all industries and sectors, and it's vital. You know, any industry that doesn't invest in research and innovation kind of goes backwards. So I think it's something that we do need to invest in, but also at the same time, the measuring and the setting the targets and actually re-evaluating the science, that is vital, because otherwise you could easily go down the wrong path based on old information. So I think it's, yeah, innovation, research, but also every now and again look back and just make sure that we are using the right kind of information, or the most up-to-date information.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. And thank you actually to all the speakers for the presentations and actually for the panel discussion just now. So many thanks to you. Also, many thanks to all the attendees and for the very active discussion in the chat, and apologies if we haven't got to your specific question in there. Hopefully we've covered a broad range of those and the speakers have been addressing those. So I guess we'd better quickly wrap up so the next session can get started and we can be finished by 3:30. Okay, so thanks very much everybody and take care.